Hey guys, Vance here from the My Latin Life podcast. Today we have a bonus episode for you. This is my guest appearance on the IMI Daily podcast, The Mobility Standard, aka Investment Migration Insider, hosted by Christian Nesheim. In this episode, we talk a lot about sovereignty, second passports, best residencies in Latin America, and all those great flag theory and investment migration concepts. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this special episode.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's 7 p.m. in Dubai, 3 p.m. in Lisbon, 11 a.m. in St. Kitts. Welcome to a new episode of the Mobility Standard, the podcast where we dissect current events, trends, and crucial questions related to investment migration. I'm your host, Christian Nesheim, editor of IMI, and in this episode, I had the pleasure of hosting the men behind two prominent Twitter accounts in the global citizenship space, My Latin Life and BowTiedMara. We spoke about the fastest paths to citizenship in Latin America, the relative strategic advantages of the various Latin American citizenships, whether there's a physical presence requirement for naturalization in Paraguay, naturalizing in Argentina without becoming a tax resident, the best countries for birth tourism in Latin America, whether the number of Westerners moving to Latin America is as big as it seems on Twitter, how likely Latin American countries are to tighten their naturalization policies in response to growing demand, and whether you can renounce Argentine citizenship, and if you can't, whether that's even an issue. All of that and a great deal more in today's episode of the Mobility Standard. Now, before we start, I'd like to tell you that if you haven't already signed up for our Pro membership, you really should consider it, simply because it'll make you more money as an investment migration professional. With a Pro membership, you'll get your very own profile in IMI where clients can contact you directly. You'll have full access to our data center, to our private briefings, to all our reports, and many other tools and resources that'll help you make more money and become a better investment migration professional. Now, with the preambles out of the way, let's get this show on the road. So I want to begin by first discussing how both of you fit into the, I don't even know what to call this space, but like global citizen slash passport bros. I mean, passport bros has become sort of a derogatory term, but sovereign individuals, I guess. How do you fit into that community? Obviously, you're both Latin America enthusiasts. You also collect residencies and citizenships. Vance, as far as I'm aware, you probably collected the most residencies and citizenships out of all of us. I don't know if you're happy to disclose, but what are the citizenships and residencies that you have so far?
Sure. So I have Canadian, American, Italian citizenship, working on Mexican citizenship, right? And hopefully a few others coming soon. And residencies also includes Paraguay, Panama, Portugal, and one or two more I'll keep secret.
Okay. Because you're not there enough, or what?
No comment. They say you should always keep like one or two secret, like don't tell a soul type of thing. So yeah.
Mara, you're Dutch originally.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned once on Twitter that you kind of held off on getting your Argentina citizenship because of the rules around dual citizenship in the Netherlands.
Yes.
But that's since been liberalized, right?
Well, no, it's still like the three exceptions apply. So that is if you were born in that other country, if you've lived there 5 years before turning 18, or if you're married to a citizen of that other country. Only in those three scenarios do you keep your Dutch citizenship if you take on another citizenship. So for me now, now that I'm married, etc., I can do it, and that wouldn't be an issue. So I kind of waited to first give citizenship to my daughters, and then I'll renew my passport first, and then I'll get the RG passport after that.
Nice. And Vance, I remember you were, we were kind of sort of half joking. I don't know if you were joking or maybe you were serious, but you told me you were seriously interested in getting the Pakistani Commonwealth CBI, citizenship by investment. It's about $18,000 to get citizenship in Pakistan. It's a 5 million Pakistani rupee deposit, I think. Did you look into that?
Yeah, you connected me with a guy. He kind of like walked me through it in more detail. And he's just like, look, this is going to be kind of insane bureaucracy and headaches like every step of the way.
Right.
And then I think there was even a thing about like a bit of a weird presence requirement in Pakistan while you're waiting for certain documents or something like that. So I think ultimately like didn't overly make sense. If it was simply 18 grand, give me a passport, I would do it just for lols.
Right.
But I think it's a little bit more involved than that.
Right. Tied Passport, another excellent Twitter account who pointed this out. It's like you have kind of a double protection. If something happens with Mercosur and that for whatever reason starts fragmenting, then you have a fallback with the Comunidad Andina settlement block, right? So that's a counter argument when you say stick to the founding members of Mercosur. The founding members of Mercosur are not in Comunidad Andina.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask.
I could add an anecdote before you switch it up.
Please do.
So
I love anecdotes.
I had a client just this past month from Brazil who wanted to migrate to Peru. So we, helped him get his police check from Brazil, get it apostilled, and then all he had to do was book a flight to Peru, and we got him his residency. So obviously that's kind of like Mercosur plus,
right?
Because Peru is not like a founding Mercosur country, but that Brazilian guy was still able to literally just fly to Peru and set up shop.
Yeah. So it's important to point out that it's not Mercosur, like membership in Mercosur in itself that's important. What's important is that the country is part of the Mercosur residency agreement, and they're two different things. I mean, they largely overlap, but not completely. But yeah, it's an excellent point, Vance. It's practically, I mean, it's one level of complication above the European Union, because in the European Union you literally just show up and you have all the same rights already. Here in the Mercosur residency agreement, you have to at least bring them a police certificate, but that's it.
That's basically it.
Yep. Yeah, and I would like to see an overview. I've never done this, but this I'm going to give this task to myself to actually per country see what they accept of each other, because I do think there's a difference there. Like for example, if you check on Mercosur residency in Argentina, they literally like list every single country, even Suriname and Guyana. They can come here. They only need their criminal record clean, and then they can come and live here. I don't think that's the same case in every single country. So that would be interesting to see like who accepts who within this Mercosur residency block, because I think Brazil is a lot stricter with that.
But is that a unilateral thing for Argentina? I mean, is it related to the Mercosur residency agreement, or is it just they're saying like everybody in South America is welcome, whether you're in Mercosur or not?
They call that the Mercosur temporary residency, and they also have an additional plus for Brazilians, which is completely on their kind of behalf. Is like a Brazilian can show up with the same documents, and instead of getting the 2-year temporary, which is for all the rest of the Mercosur citizens, Brazilian gets permanent residency right away. So they don't even have to wait the 2 years. They immediately get permanent residency in Argentina. Now, I think vice versa, if an Argentine goes to Brazil, that's not the case. I do think they have like a 2-year span too, that they have to live there first before they get permanent. But like those things I would like to check to see like how reciprocal those things are. And, because there's a lot of disparity, I think, between countries.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Just like there is within the CPLP, right?
Yeah.
So a more difficult question for me to answer is essentially once you have an EU citizenship, now you're in that block, and then you get your Mercosur citizenship. The first two that you should aim for, it's pretty clear what the two best SSBs are. But then what's number 3? Is it CARICOM? Is it Common Travel Area? Or maybe the Compact of Free Association, which includes the United States and 4 tiny islands in the Pacific? What would be your priority number 3?
Well, I think for me, probably the Central American block, which is probably not that interesting for
CA4.
most, but just because I'm more interested in Latin America, like I could see that being an option for me.
Yeah.
But yeah,
The
yeah,
Central America Four. Yeah, they have no border controls. But that's not exactly a settlement block because you don't get the right to settle. What you do get is it's like Schengen. It's like the Schengen area. But
okay, got it. Yeah,
so four countries. It's El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And basically, once you're in, you're in. So you can move freely within those countries. But it doesn't mean that you have, like, I don't think Hondurans have a right to settle forever in, let's say, El Salvador without any paperwork. But
okay.
it's probably moving in that direction. What do you think about CARICOM? That's CARICOM residency agreement. That's 12 countries, but it's tiny though.
Yeah, isn't that like mainly the Caribbean island groups, and then
Yeah,
yeah,
it's the smallest of the settlement blocks. I mean, smallest in terms of the square area, smallest in terms of GDP, and so on. It's interesting, but still, it's 12 countries, so it's something. Another one that's really interesting is, if you get Irish citizenship, then you're part of not only the EU EEA bloc, but you're also part of the Common Travel Area, which means now you can settle in not only Ireland but also the UK. So England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Isle of Man, Guernsey, Jersey, and so on. So that's also interesting. Then you have the Trans-Tasman Travel Arrangement, which is just Australia and New Zealand. And for people who want something more exotic, there's the Eurasian Economic Union, which is actually really well integrated. It's almost at the level, I mean, it's kind of like Mercosur in terms of integration, but it's so Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Armenia. So you can move and settle freely in those countries. But, it's not for everybody. But look, I want to talk to you guys about Latin America because I think it's the most interesting region in terms of citizenship for a number of reasons. First of all, because it's so much easier to get citizenship in the Americas than it is in most other regions, or it's easier than every other region in the world. So among the top 10 countries worldwide that have the shortest ordinary naturalization periods, 7 of them are in Latin America. And in fact, countries in the Americas have the shortest naturalization periods overall, averaging just 5.4 years, and that's compared to 8 or 9 years in the other continents on average. And several countries in Latin America actually offer naturalization in as little as 2 years. Argentina is one of them, obviously. Peru is another, Dominican Republic. Let me put this question to you, Vance. What is it about Latin America that makes it so open to giving out citizenship, you think, compared to others?
That is a good question. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of different factors. I think because just historically it's needed migration. It's an absolutely gigantic place. Like South America is absolutely gigantic. Latin America is even bigger. I think it's just always historically been open. Like the Americas in general, it's not just the Latin speaking countries, it's United States, Canada, the Caribbean, Latin America, these places, like the entire Americas has always been historically very open to migration. So I really think it's just kind of that.
Mara, do you think it's just the politicians there? I mean, when they first settled these areas, they were like, okay, we need to settle these all this square mileage with Spaniards before the Portuguese come and claim it. Is that
Well,
it?
I think the mass movement, at least in Argentina, is a little bit after that. They weren't that preoccupied with the big settlements right after they got their independence from Spain. But around 1850, they specifically have this philosophical movement as well, where and this is during the writing of the Constitution, where they state like, okay, we need to promote, European immigration or whatever, because that's just what they knew. And we need to, naturalize them rather quickly, etc. And we need to populate these lands, because that was around the same time that the whole southern part of Argentina, like almost half of the country or more, was still like a no man's land and was not occupied by Argentina, basically. So it was either Argentina or Chile that would get that slice of the cake. So they needed to have a campaign to conquer that from the original tribes that were still living there, more nomadic tribes. There weren't that many.
Right.
And they need a lot of people basically to settle here and just, claim lands. And I think that happened throughout Latin America in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it was purposefully, making it easy and getting in as much immigration as possible.
Yeah, and you see that's a tactic that's still used today. The tactic of saying, if we get our people to settle these areas, then we'll have a stronger claim to these areas, right? So this is what the Chinese have been doing in Xinjiang. This is what Russians are doing in the Donbass, right, or in Crimea, whatever. Like, if you can get your people in there, then you can say, no, but look, the majority of people who live here are our nationality, so really this should be part of our country, not whatever it is today. So it's a strategy that's worked historically, and I'm not surprised that it's still in use today. But what I'm curious about now that, I mean, it may just be because we live on Twitter, and it seems like the whole world is just moving to Latin America. It certainly seems that way on my Twitter feed when, it's populated by posts of guys like you, that it's just super hot. Everybody wants to go to Latin America, want to get citizenship in Mercosur, residencies, etc. Do you think that with this large movement of people coming in to take advantage of the, let's say, lax naturalization requirements, that there's a risk that the countries might say, you know what, let's put a moratorium on this, let's take a little pause in immigration? Or is it just in my world that it seems that there's a lot of people moving to Latin America, and in reality it's just a trickle?
I think the numbers are definitely smaller than it probably seems. Like, if you take Mexico, which is probably one of the most popular countries, they only get something on the order of 10,000 new residents or new American residents per year.
That's it?
Nothing. Yeah, it's like very, very small. And really? So you think there's basically like 1 million people going over the US border per month.
Yeah.
And there's 10,000 per year, or maybe like 1,000 per month going to Mexico. Right. So it's like orders of magnitude smaller.
But is that, just 1,000 a month or 10,000 a year? That's, I mean, are you counting all categories of, are we counting rentista, visa? Well, they don't have rentista.
Yeah, I think that's like Americans obtaining any residence in Mexico.
Yeah, just Americans, but
I think just Americans, but that's the biggest group.
Yeah, that'll be the biggest group anyway.
Yeah, and that's like the country that's the most open to migration, really. I mean, like Brazil's not really receiving migrants. I mean, Argentina is. Yeah. Who else is? Like, no one's, they're all like open to it, but no one's receiving like super massive numbers. There's probably more internal movement than there is movement from, say, Europe. Like, there's lots of Brazilians coming to Paraguay. There's lots of Venezuelans going everywhere. There's lots of Guatemalans going to Mexico, I guess. So there's probably, like, by the numbers, there's more internal migration than there is international immigration. They're very open to it. Like, it's honestly very easy to do. I don't know why it's not more, I guess, but that's kind of just to put things in context. It's, we talk about how popular it is on Twitter and these things, but the actual numbers are really quite small because we're just a small corner of the internet.
Yeah.
But, maybe we're just early, and we are early because we've obviously spotted this thing. And we have that intellectual curiosity, and over the past couple of years, we've certainly seen it growing. But it is small.
Do you have that impression, Vance? You have the impression that it's growing? This, let's say, let's call them passport bros for lack of a better term. Is that is that growing, or does it just seem that way to us?
I think it's absolutely growing. I think even if you just ask people at a Thanksgiving dinner, the sentiment certainly changed after 2020. Like, if you spoke to someone with the first world passport American, Canadian, Norway passport back in 2019, and you said, "Hey, why don't we like move to Portugal and get the Portuguese passport in 5 years?" Blah blah blah. Like they'd be like, "Dude, there's no reason we need to do that." You
Right.
know what I mean? like what am I gonna do with the second passport? But I think post 2020, everyone kind of realized the importance of how visas can change and all the rest of it. Travel freedoms can be curtailed, and
And seeing how open Mexico was, for example, for Americans, like right across the border, it was practically, normal life.
Yeah. I think Canada is actually a very good case if you look at it in the last 2-3 years, because the immigration has gone through the roof. Basically, we see it with applications for E2 visas, EB5.
Yeah.
So a lot of Canadians going to the US as well. But I think it's like a combination of the pandemic measures that they had in Canada, combined with the current policies and taxes maybe, that they just got fed up and started to leave. But it's interesting that they're actually doing it, and that it does have a lag a little bit of like a year or so before
Yeah.
they, of course, they need to get their stuff together and do it. But now you can really see those numbers spike. I think the 2023 has been a record of outflow, but still the net migration, I think, is positive.
Positive.
So
Yeah.
there's still more people coming to Canada. But then the question is, who is leaving and who is coming?
Right.
It's like very
Obviously,
interesting right now.
obviously, Vance, you have your finger on that pulse, I'm sure. But I mean, just from the outside, what it looks like to me is just like Mara is explaining. You have young guys that have remote jobs like yourself. They're leaving Canada for Latin America in a lot of cases. And who's coming in? Well, I think the other day I saw a statistic that said it's like a third of the new arrivals to Canada are from India, and a lot of it is frankly third world immigration to Canada. So it's, on the one hand, you are like, the third world is coming to Canada, and the third world is having a lot more kids in Canada than the locals. And in addition, like on top of that, you have the local Canadians leaving, and probably, I mean, what are the drivers of that? If I had to guess, I would say, well,
Mhm.
it's all the wokeness, it's all the restrictions on free speech, it's what they did to the truckers during the pandemic with the freezing of accounts. It's super high taxes, and there's another factor which is not new but which is important nonetheless. It's, you have a crap climate, right? So what are you
Mhm.
seeing, Vance, among your Canadian friends, and are people leaving en masse?
Yeah, it's cost of living, it's taxes. I mean, one other big thing that happened in 2020 was just the percentage of the population that works remote has grown exponentially.
Yeah.
And once you start working remote, or better yet, you become entrepreneur and you're not working for a company, you're much less reliant on that system or that government. And the calculus changes. Like if you're working a job and you pay 50% taxes, you're kind of like, I don't know, it's part of the deal.
Yeah.
But if you earn that money yourself because you have a social media marketing agency and then you have to give 50% of it to the Canadian government, you
Right.
start being like, you know what, this kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And maybe for some people, it takes a year or two of doing that before they say, like, why am I giving away this 50% when they didn't help me earn it, type of thing. So I think it is kind of something that is a slow roll. And then people say, you know what, I'm trying to leave.
Yeah.
But definitely a lot of people are definitely, like, a lot of people are trying to leave. And it's a combination of everything, right? It's the cost of living. It's mass migration. It's a little bit of everything. I remember when I went to your Malta event, you actually had a guy there, like an Indian guy, who helps Indians move to Canada and stuff like that, and he helps them
Yeah.
get the student visa and stuff. And so, as much as we know your friend Nomad Capitalist and kind of the English speaking influencers, I need to do like a deep dive on what the hell they're saying in the Hindi accounts or something, right? There's probably some hilarious like Hindi TikTok accounts, because someone is motivating these
Yeah.
1.4 million people that moved to Canada last year and so forth.
Sure.
And you've probably seen like some TikToks here and there about people like getting taught how to cross the southern border and like where to cross and that kind of thing. And there's probably like way more of these that we haven't even found yet.
There's probably a Twitter account called My Canadian Life,
Yeah.
in Hindi.
Oh yeah,
They
Totally.
run ads.
100%.
They run ads. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny to me how, I mean, I say funny, but what I mean is it's very encouraging to me to see that basically all the predictions from The Sovereign Individual, the book that came out in 97, it's all coming true. It's all coming true in the same order that that book predicted, which is essentially capital and people are becoming mobile, and when their incomes are not tied to a location anymore, then I mean, we spoke about this when I was in your podcast, Vance, how basically technology is setting people free and allowing them to shop around for jurisdictions. And I think we're right now at sort of the intersection of, people have woken up and they're starting to leave and they're starting to realize I can live with a lower cost of living and way lower taxes and way better weather in other places because my income is remote now. We've reached that stage. The stage we haven't yet reached fully, I think, is when the governments start to say, hey, we're losing all our best brains to countries that offer better terms. And I feel as though that second, I mean, what's the phrase, the other shoe hasn't dropped yet, right? Where the governments recognize that actually we need
They
to
have to
attract.
compete more.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think like
Yeah.
the digital nomad visa is probably like one of the first
that's one
iterations of that.
manifestation of it. Yeah.
Yeah, one manifestation. I think we're going to see more and more of that. And how, like, sometimes it's not even about the country. People just want to live in a particular city, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, we're going to see a huge thing around competition between
Yeah.
governments and cities in the future.
And it's funny to see this play out like in real time in Amsterdam, for example. I didn't know this, but I did some research after seeing some videos, and I thought, like, is it really the case? Because in one video they stated like more than half of the population in Amsterdam is foreign. So I started digging in and stuff, and then I found out that about 30% is non-Western
Mhm.
foreigners, and then the other 23% or something is Western foreigners. So that means expats. And then looking into, there's actually government programs to get like brains into Amsterdam. They can live there for like 2 or 3 years, don't pay taxes, and it's all to work for local companies usually. And it's a way of the Netherlands like trying to get talent and retain it in a way. And the side effect of that is that housing has gone through the roof. It's like super expensive to live in Amsterdam now because these people all have like high salaries, etc. But at the same time, that's the way they try to sort of prevent a brain drain by attracting talent from other places.
Yeah, it's funny. Who would have thought, just a decade ago that European countries, that North American countries would have to take measures to stem brain drain, right? That was always a problem of the third world.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, let me get back a bit to citizenships in Latin America because the opportunities are practically endless. So I want to discuss which citizenships in Latin America merit the most attention. So I want each of you to sort of highlight which Latin country you would most recommend for, in different categories here, people looking for ordinary naturalization. So that's like, a single guy that has no ties to the country and he wants to naturalize. Then there are people who want to do birth tourism. There are people who are from what we call preferred nationalities, because there's a lot of countries in Latin America that have a fast track to naturalization if you're from the right country, typically from a Spanish speaking country. And then also for people who are considering marrying a local citizen and get citizenship that way. So let's start with ordinary naturalization. What I can tell you right off the bat, I can tell you which countries are the fastest for ordinary naturalization, not just in Latin America, but in the world. Argentina, 2 years of residency. Dominican Republic, same thing, 2 years. Peru, 2 years. Then Bolivia, 3 years. Canada, 3 years after PR. So once you get PR in Canada, it's not Latin America, but it's the Americas. Honduras, 3 years of residency. Paraguay, 3 years of residency.
One question about Paraguay, because is it the case that with your, 1 day or 2 days a year kind of residency in Paraguay,
Yeah.
does that count towards citizenship, or do you really need to live there in order to get the citizenship?
So the answer is I don't know. I'm personally very interested in getting a clear-cut answer to that question for reasons I won't disclose. But I can tell you that what the law says is that you have to have. So there's no provision in the law that says you must spend the majority of your year in Paraguay to naturalize.
Actually, there kind of is.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah.
So here's what was explained to me, and I haven't personally read the law. I'm sure you have. What was explained to me was you have to have arraigos, right? You have to have ties. You have to have links to the Paraguay community, and then there are various ways of arguing that you have links. It might be that you own property. It might be that you have a job there. It might be, bank accounts, SIM cards, what have you. But are you saying there is a hard and fast rule about physical presence?
I wouldn't say it's like a law, but it's like a decree from the Supreme Court saying that you have to spend 9 months a year in Paraguay, and you can't have spent more than 3 consecutive months outside of Paraguay. And
Okay.
that's been around for over a year now. And then they actually put out like a addendum or like restated it actually just a couple weeks ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 9
Okay.
months out of the year. And it just came out a year ago?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know the exact day, but yeah, I had a buddy like go into the Supreme Court and says like, "Hey, like what's the deal?" And then they gave him this piece of paper that said that.
Wow.
And then I got informed that they like put out a new statement a couple weeks ago, basically reiterating the same thing.
Okay. That's not good news for a lot of people.
That makes it even harder than Argentina, because I think here it's a max or minimum of 6 to 7 months that you have to stay in the country in order to, retain your residency and then eventually apply for citizenship.
Yeah, so when you mentioned that about Argentina and how long you have to stay to in those first 2 years, I had a question. I took some questions from the audience yesterday on Twitter. Jason wants to know, is it possible to become a citizen of Argentina without also becoming tax resident for those 2 years? So I know that, for example, in Spain, if you want to naturalize, however, whatever track you're on, some people are on 2 year tracks, some people are on 10-year tracks, right? But in
Mm-hmm.
Spain, the rule is you got to spend minimum 180 days a year in Spain. That's 3 days less than it would take to make you tax resident, right? So it means that if you count your days in Spain like very cautiously, technically it's possible to get to naturalize in Spain, but also not become tax resident. What's the case in Argentina, as far as you know?
So I'm not sure about the theory or what's on paper, but
Mm-hmm.
what in practice happens is that as if people are on a rentista visa or they work for a local company and have a work visa, for example, usually for the work visa, their taxes are collected directly at the source, so withheld from their salaries. And for the rest, they would really have to try to file more taxes than that. Basically, for most employees, nobody ever, files taxes if they just have their own home and maybe a car or something. A lot of people don't do a declaration at the end of the year. For the rentista, basically, the amount that you wire, which is around 2K a month, the government assumes that you live off that money and you don't have any other tax obligations. So you don't really become a tax resident, no matter what if it's like 183 days. And there's even an arrangement where the first 5 years, if you work for a local company, you don't have to pay taxes here except for what they withhold on your salary.
So
So,
you don't.
in practice, in practice, people just don't file because on paper you would have to file taxes over all your worldwide assets, etc. But in practice, that just doesn't happen.
But they do check your presence?
They check your presence through migration, so they see when you entered and exited.
Yeah.
But even that is not controlled that securely when you go and request citizenship. When you want to renew your visa, then
Yeah.
yes, because that is ad migraciones, and they actually check when stamps in your passport or the files in the computer, and they check when you entered and left the country. And based on if you've been out of the country for more than half the year, then they won't renew your visa because you weren't really living here.
Can you do the trick where you leave Argentina overland,
Yeah.
for example? Yeah, and you go into one of the neighboring countries and then fly out of there,
Yeah,
and just
that's
kind of
something you could do.
continue in Argentina the whole time.
Yeah, that's something you could do. When you get to the citizenship procedure, you do have to show some ties, like the arraigo, like you said in Paraguay. It's sort of the same here, where if it can be a house, it can be other bills or whatever, but you do have to show that you have ties to the country, basically.
Yeah.
And then it's a judge who decides if you get citizenship or not. Now, the vast majority is accepted. It's not that common to have a refusal. Usually, what we hear is that if you need a lawyer, then they become more detailed and check. Okay, like maybe there's something fishy with this because they need a lawyer. Because otherwise, you could do it on your own.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe the best is to have a lawyer advising you, just not bring him to the meetings.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
and as far as I know, Argentina is one of the few countries, and this might change with Milei, where technically in the constitution it says any habitante, so anybody living on Argentine soil after 2 years can get citizenship. And it does happen that people, get into the country, overstay their visa. They don't actually have a valid visa anymore, and they could still apply for citizenship. They might change this in the future, where they say, "No, look, you didn't have a visa or whatever."
You have to be a legal resident for 2
You
years.
have to be a legal resident. But as far as of now, that still happens. The case is just a little bit harder. It's way better to have residency, legal residency, and then your case is a lot stronger.
Yeah, I also think for most people, especially in our community, it's the hurdle of getting links or ties to the country is easier to overcome than the physical presence requirement. So if you can figure that out, that's the best. Okay, I have more questions from the audience also about Argentina. I'll leave that for the end. But for now, what's your number one? Let's start with you, Vance. What's your number one recommendation for ordinary naturalization in South America, in Latin America?
Yeah, sure. I think it probably is important to preface this by saying that Latin America is really good for residency and obtaining residency quickly, but passports are slightly a different story because in most countries it's civil law and it's going to be assessed by a judge, and it's sort of a mosaic picture where they're kind of looking at your holistic situation, your arraigos, your ties, and this and that. So it's not the same as, say, in Canada or Europe, where it's like, okay, you did the 270 days, now we issue the passport, bing, bam, boom. So
it's a qualitative argument that
it's
you're
more
making.
qualitative, and yeah, it's just not meant to be boom, issue it the next day type of thing. So with that being said, we do know kind of which countries are more like that, where they're more, they'll just issue it if you meet the qualifications. And then there are other countries where we know that they're just really not issuing the passports, even if you qualify.
Yeah,
For example,
Panama is a good example.
Panama is the famous example.
Yeah. What are some examples of the opposite, where you say it's if you tick the boxes, they let you in?
So that kind of comes back to your original question, was which countries should you put the time in and get the citizenship?
Yeah.
So I would say basically the ones you said: Peru, put in the 2 years, they'll actually give you the passport. Argentina, do the 2 years, they'll actually give you the passport. Dominican, probably going to have some classic Dominican mañana bureaucracy, but they should give you the passport eventually. And how amazing is that? Because if you just did 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 6 years in the future, maybe you're 30 years old today. By the time you're 36, 37, you're going to have 3 new passports. Like, how incredible is that, right? So I think the 3 mentioned are great. And then I would probably add Mexico to that as well. With Mexico, it's technically a 5-year path to citizenship, but there's only 18 months of physical presence in the last 2 years, in years 4 and 5. So it's just 18 months of presence. So that's and they'll actually issue you the passport. So
Are you planning on doing that once you have your Mexican citizenship? Or are you going to move on to spend time in a couple other Latin American countries? I know you're a family man, so I don't know how easy it is to combine that.
yeah, I do want to do something. I am itching to mix it up. So yeah.
Okay. Really cool.
So those would be the 4 I would say. What else could you even add to that? Those probably really are the big 4: Mexico, Dominican, Peru, and Argentina, in terms of, fast path to citizenship with, less than 2 years invested.
Mara?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. Well, Mexico, is that only 2 years? It's longer, right?
Well, it's 18 months physical presence within a 24-month period.
Got it.
During years 4 and 5. Or if you get married or have a kid, then you skip the first 3 years and it goes straight to that 18 months situation.
Yeah, that's the same here. And I think in Brazil and other countries, it's similar, where if you have a kid who's like an Argentine or you're married to one, then, you could even do it after a year already, apply for citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good deal. And one thing that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to Mexico, obviously Mexico is not part of Mercosur, but it is part of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC. And if you're a citizen of one of those countries and you are a person who does business, you can get a APEC business travel card, which gives you short-term visa-free access to a huge part of the globe. So that's countries including Russia, China, Australia, Canada, Chile, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Mexico, obviously, United States, Thailand, Taiwan, etc. So that's an underexplored advantage of that. Okay, so let's consider birth tourism. I'm expecting my first child next month, and I tried to convince my wife to fly out to Chile or something like this to give birth. She wasn't too hot on that idea just last minute. So my child will be born here in Portugal, and so she will be born actually with 4 citizenships on day one. One of them will be Portuguese, because here as long as the parents have been legal residents for at least a year when the child is born, then you have jus soli, you have birthright citizenship also here in Portugal.
Oh, interesting.
And it's not very normal in the European countries, and it's quite new. It was only introduced 3 or 4 years ago, this provision.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's a good opportunity to get your EU citizenship. Just be a resident for 1 year in Portugal, and your kid will be born there. Okay, looking at Latin America, there are several popular birth tourism destinations. Practically every country in Latin America has jus soli. They have birthright citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
So what differentiates the countries in terms of how attractive they are for birth tourism is the degree to which the parents of that child can get citizenship on the basis of their child having been born in that country and getting citizenship. So the ones that are typically mentioned are Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Those are the 3 big birth tourism destinations. So I want both of you to give me your take on which one is the best for those looking to gain citizenship by giving birth to a child in Latin America.
I think Mexico is a big one too, right, for birth tourism. Do
Mexico
parents
too.
have like a
They get the
and
18 months, as we talked
yeah,
about. They get
okay,
instant PR, and then they put in 18 months.
okay, yeah, I
Instant
do
P.
think.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do think it's the same in at least Argentina and Brazil. In Chile, I do know that there's like it's a little bit harder for the parents.
Okay.
I don't know the exact details, but I read that a while back that for birth tourism in Chile, you do have to do additional stuff that you don't have to do in Argentina and Brazil.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Let me just see. I had an overview. Someone posted a great overview. I think it
And
was.
it's funny because it's the only country with ESTA for the US,
Yeah.
and Argentina used to have ESTA in the 90s. And they used to have visa-free travel to the U.S., and they took that away after so many Chinese supermarkets started opening here. Because China, during those years, had a government kind of program where a family would get, I think, $50,000 to
Yeah.
start a business offshore somewhere, and Argentina was one of those places. So all of a sudden, there was like a bunch of Chinese supermarkets popping up left and right. And of course, all these people, after 2 years, got their Argentine citizenship, which was a way better travel document than their Chinese. Technically, they can't have dual citizenship, I believe, but in practice, everybody does that. So then they kind of shut off the ESTA visa for Argentina after that. And it wouldn't surprise me that because of this, like Chile is always a little bit more complicated just because they don't want to lose that.
Right.
One thing I would add, if I can just add one more thing, is we actually don't know how this works with some of the smaller countries because we literally just don't have that many anecdotes. So if you took something like an Ecuador or a Nicaragua or a Honduras or some of these countries, we
Yeah.
just don't know what happens when a gringo gives birth to a baby. We probably can assume that they'll get like instant PR or TR, right? We don't know if it's P or R or TR, or if they're going to be able to get citizenship right away. So some of this stuff is just so new in terms of people kind of having eyes on it that
There's
we're
no
constant.
precedent. Is
There's
that what
no
you're saying?
precedent. I mean, I'm sure people have done it, but they're just not like out there with it. So
Right. Right.
so it's something that we're definitely very interested in, and we're gonna have to work together in the future, My Latin Life and IMI, and keep compiling information on this stuff.
Yeah. Kevron Sutton on Twitter asks if it's true that once you've naturalized in Mexico, that you need to visit Mexico at least once every 7 years to retain your citizenship.
I don't know off the top of my head. A lot of countries have that though, where you
Yeah.
have to at least visit at one point.
Right.
But like, who's gonna? It's not automatic that you lose it. People got to remember, like, some random bureaucrat would have to probably start like a judicial process. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not like an automatic stripping from you. So
Right.
another thing we don't even have that many precedents on.
Right. All
Yeah,
right. Well,
I do think for that one, probably the most important is to always renew your passport and never, get to the
Mm,
due date where it expires. Because once your passport expires, then yes, a lot of countries have issues of like renewing the passport if you have an expired one.
very good point.
all
Very good
right.
Yeah,
point.
All right, Vance. We'll let you
Cheers,
go.
guys.
We'll carry on for a bit more, Mara. Ciao.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
See you,
guys.
Vance.
All right. I got a couple of questions for you from the audience, Mara.
Okay.
Latin Haven would like a definitive answer as to whether it's possible to renounce Argentinian citizenship. We've talked about this in the past. Argentine citizenship is supposed to be
hmm
non-renounceable. You've argued that it's not a big deal even if you can't renounce it because, I mean, the fear many have is that one day a country will impose citizenship-based taxation like the Americans, and then
hmm
you'd want to renounce that citizenship. But what if you can't? You've argued that it's not a big deal. First of all, why is it not a big deal that you can't renounce it? And the second question is, are you sure it cannot be renounced?
So, yeah, first of all, I don't think it's a big issue because there's no way Argentina can enforce citizenship taxation. Plus, they would need to change the constitution for that. Why can't they enforce it? Like, there's only two countries in the world that have citizenship based taxation, which is the US and Eritrea. And guess who can actually enforce it? Not
Right.
Eritrea. And
Right.
Argentina, although it's like a bigger country, bigger economy, they could never enforce something like this just because they don't own the banking rails. And, the US has that enforcement mechanism, either because they have a lot of control over SWIFT and, all these banking and transaction flows, or just because everybody wants to do business with the US
Yeah.
and they will just comply. And you can really see that because any kind of bank here in Argentina or in Europe, doesn't matter, like they will always ask, are you a resident or a citizen in the US? And,
Same in Europe. They
yeah,
always ask. Yeah.
and they're not gonna add an additional box if Argentina decides to do that, right? I mean, there's just
Right.
no way, because the U.S. for implementing FATCA, they didn't even have to re-sign all their treaties. Now,
Right.
France looked into this because they were thinking about, we might do citizenship-based taxation because so many of our billionaires are leaving. So they looked into it, and they would actually have to re-sign a lot of their trade agreements with other countries, and then it would just be the question if they would get enough back from that, and they made like the calculation that it would actually have a negative return implementing something like this. Now, if it would for France would be a negative return, imagine for a country like Argentina.
Right.
And it's even worse in Argentina because in Argentina nobody complies. Basically, if all the Argentines living abroad, they would never pay something like that. They would just like, no way.
Right.
So
Yeah.
because they can,
They can't even enforce tax laws inside Argentina. So forget about
exactly.
outside of Argentina.
Yeah, so I think it's really a non-issue from like an American mindset where they sort of portray the power of their government on other countries. And I
Yeah.
mean, not even France would be able to do something like this, let alone Argentina. And, if a small country decides, like Eritrea, I think they did that out of pure despair because they needed money and they decided to pass that law. In the
Yeah.
end, like, they couldn't even collect. So,
And that was a 3% tax.
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, no, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think other stuff would be more important, like how if Millet becomes goes for a second term, could it be possible that with an Argentine passport, at some point they decide to leave the Mercosur or something like that? I don't think that's going to happen at all, but those are more important things to think about, I think, than citizenship-based taxation. Yeah. With
Good.
regards to can you get rid of the
Yeah.
citizenship? So I asked a second opinion, another lawyer, because I had one lawyer say, and I wrote about this on my blog as well, and he said, like, look, it's no issue. Well, but he's always like kind of, that's just his modus operandi. He's like, no, nothing is an issue. So he sent me some cases back then of citizenship that was taken away. But those cases were actually, well, one was that the guy actually wanted to become an Argentine, and the other one was that it was a Dominican who was stripped of his citizenship for crimes against the patria, which
Yeah.
is basically, if you commit a serious enough crimes, they can take away your Argentine citizenship and deport you. But in all other cases, I have not yet seen a case because that lawyer said, like, you can basically start a lawsuit against the state and it's a long process, but then you can eventually get rid of the citizenship. The other lawyer said that, really it is, you cannot get rid of it basically. So I'm I'm more inclined to stick with that assumption that once you get it, you can't get rid of it. But that's also not an issue. It could actually be work in your favor when you get another citizenship. For example, in the Netherlands, that is something
Right.
they did flex about because that used to be very unflexible. But for example, Maxima, Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, when she became a Dutch citizen, they wanted to get rid of her Argentine nationality, but since that wasn't possible, they had to leave it. So actually, I think it's actually a positive. I think there's a couple more countries, not 100% sure, but I think Morocco and Turkey also have something where it's very hard to get rid of it. And I
Right.
think it works in your favor for getting other
Yeah.
citizenships.
Yeah. I guess unless there's like, imagine Russians right now are having a lot of trouble, right? Just for being Russians.
Yeah.
They're excluded from a variety of investment migration programs. They're excluded from banking, from doing business, etc. But if they say, look, I want to renounce, but I can't, right? Maybe that is something that could work in their favor, yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick McFawn from Vexillum Global wants to know what the processing times are for naturalization in Argentina.
The processing times right now is, start it a year early, just in case. It can take up to at least 6 months, and in some cases longer, depending on the province that you do it in. So one way to speed it up is to not do it in Capital, so not in Buenos Aires, in the capital, but in the provincia de Buenos Aires, so in the province, which is another jurisdiction.
Do you
So
have
you just
to? Do you have to be empadronado in?
yeah.
In
So you have to be
you have to
a
apply.
resident.
You have to apply where you are empadronado.
Yes, yeah. So it's based on your official address. So it can be beneficial just to cross the border. Here it's only one highway, and then you're in the
Yeah,
province of Buenos Aires.
right.
To get an address there, have it verified, and then you could basically do it there. Because the thing is, there's such a big influx of Russians and Ukrainians, but mainly Russians,
Yeah,
who are applying right now. And there's only 8 judges in the capital who are completely flooded with applications. So
right.
yeah, if you want to do it faster, that's a good bet to just do it in another province.
But you say you should start a year early. You mean can you file your application before you're actually eligible? Because you have to wait 2 years until you're eligible.
Yeah, but you can already start the process at least 6 months before that, and
Okay.
gather the documents and proof, etc. And then ask for a turno. All that can take some time.
Now, once you filed your application, do you need to stay in Argentina while you wait for adjudication?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I would, if it's not a problem, I would, but I don't think it's a requirement actually. Yeah, I think you can travel in between.
Another Twitter user, Archer Bullseye, wants to know if you think that Argentina is going to remain stable long enough to get past the initial shock therapy of Milei and start a new cycle of growth. Like, can Milei bridge that gap, you think?
I really hope so. I mean, that's what everybody's looking at now. I think the next 6 months are going to be crucial to see if he actually pulls it off or not. And patience is going to run thin because I don't see salaries improving that much. Inflation might pick up a little bit again in the second half of the year, just because there's all kinds of things that just have their periodical increase.
Yeah.
So, and there's a ton of debt in terms of maturity payments, etc., that complicate reserves. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough couple of months, that's for sure. I really hope he pulls it off because once we're through this year, I think it's going to be a lot better, and maybe not smooth sailing, but people are going to see the benefits of all this austerity and these adjustments that Milei is making. Because right now, it's insane to think that his popularity has grown, but the people belong to the people that are suffering it the most. So I mean, the people on the lower half of society, they are really, really feeling the pain right now, but they still decide yes, this is the only way to get out of this mess. So, we're prepared to pull through a few more months and then we'll see the benefits.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, but even their patience is going to wear thin if it
Yeah.
drags on for too long without results, right?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think it's going to be crucial to see at least some light at the end of the tunnel in the next couple of months.
What are the tangible positive results that are already now after? I mean, because he tore the band-aid right off in the beginning. It was a systemic, very deep systemic measures he took right away that's leading to short-term pain. But what are the first kind of signs of light at the end of the tunnel already?
So inflation has come way down, month over month inflation. And it's kind of tricky because on Twitter you see a lot of things like, oh yeah, but almost 300% inflation. But yes, that's year over year. Of course, that is very high still because he started with 25 month over month. So
Right.
it's very easy to get to triple digits. But right now we're at 5% month over month. So I do think that's going to go down more. And then
The second derivative is declining. So the growth of the
yeah.
growth is declining. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So prices are still going up, but less quickly. And I think at some point we might even have deflation in a couple of months. You can already see that with some prices and that's, I think, not so much the monetary policy, but more the recession is just like, some products are just not sold. So they decide to, sell them at a way lower price. And that's something that we're seeing. But if you look at activity, it's like obliterated. It's very, very bad. So the recession is very much a thing.
That's it for today, folks, but we'll be back soon with another episode of the Mobility Standard. Now, this podcast is open to the public, so there's a limit to the names we can name and the rumors we can discuss openly. But in our password-protected private briefings available to Pro members, we share all the sensitive intel that we can't publish. So if you want access to those and a whole host of other members-only benefits, make sure you sign up to our Pro membership today. Just go to imidaily.com/pro. I wish you all a great week and thank you for listening.